Oh, I know you don't.
Yes, sir. I'd like to start right on time, folks, commissioners. Good morning. I'd like to call the meeting of today's February 27, 2018 California State Athletic Commission to order. There's my gavel. Thank you. We're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Shanakita, would you please lead us? Salute. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Foster, will you please call the roll, establish a quorum for us?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Chairman Corbelli?
Here.
Vice Chairman Lehman?
Here.
Commissioner Frierson?
Here.
Commissioner Senior Quidez?
Here.
Commissioner Souder?
Here.
Commissioner and Dr. Williams?
Here.
Sir, Commissioner Ayala is absent. 6-0. Quorum established.
We have a quorum, thank you. Welcome, everyone. There's a chance for me to make an opening remark, and I loved my opening remark at the end of last year that I'm just going to repeat. I thought of my opening remark last year as kind of the state of the state, but I guess that should happen at the beginning of the year, correct? So, I wish to report to you all that I'm proud to say on behalf of the Commission that the California Athletic Commission is fiscally sound, it's efficiently and effectively administered, and in my humble opinion, the regulatory example, both on a national and international basis, for providing dynamic, common sense leadership in all aspects of combat sports. I suggested in December, and I'm going to suggest it again, that perhaps last year and in the years to come represent the year of our 10-point plan, which we'll talk about again, which is addressing severe dehydration in weight cutting and gaining. This plan is conceived and implemented by the Commission's Executive Officer, Mr. Foster, and the Commissioners here. This plan has been approved nationally by the Association of Boxing Commissions. It's currently being implemented in many states, with potential for more states to adopt, as well as foreign countries. I would suggest that this 10-point plan has and will fulfill the Commission's clear mission, which is an important thing to remember today, our clear mission to protect and defend the health and safety of combat athletes. Thank you very much. Agenda item number 3, pursuant to Code Section 18606, annual election of Commission Board officers for 2018. Council?
Are there any nominations for chair and vice chair?
If I can do it together, since we've been doing so well.
Yes, that's fine.
Unless anyone has any objections, I would nominate John and Mary as chair and vice chair, respectively, again.
Are there any additional nominations?
We need a second?
No.
We do not need a second. We call for the vote. Mr. Foster?
Chairman Corbella.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Lehman.
Aye.
Commissioner Fryerson.
Aye.
Commissioner Senior Quidez.
Aye.
Commissioner Sauer.
Aye.
Commissioner Dr. Williams.
Aye.
6-0, sir. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Vice Chair, would you like to say anything?
I would just say that I agree that it's been a pleasure working with you. You've done an excellent
Oh,
job.
I didn't mean about me. Thank you. I thought about you.
And but under your leadership, we've all, and everybody pulls their weight, but thank you for all you do.
Thank
I
you.
look forward to another year serving with
Thank you. It was a privilege. Agenda item number 4, approval of the December 12, 2017 Commission meeting minutes. I will need a motion to approve these minutes.
I so moved.
A motion, Commissioner Quidez, do I have a second? Second. Second, Dr. Williams. Well, now we can have some discussion. You want to start on this end of the table?
I called in my revisions already. They're in the revised version that you got in the email.
That's
you.
good.
And I sent revisions. You have those?
Yep, yes, ma'am.
So subject to the revisions then?
Yeah.
Has everyone seen the revisions?
No, they haven't seen mine. So they've seen yours?
Yes,
and they
everyone
corrected?
has
Okay,
seen
so
mine.
I will, if you want, I'll mention mine. Okay, on the discussion section, on item 6, I'm on the electronic.
So that's page 4.
Yeah, for agenda item 6, under the discussion section, second paragraph, second to last sentence,
Page 7, I mean page 5 now.
second to last sentence, the phrase, even one of the knockdowns in question. Oh my gosh, I think it's not. It's supposed to be in question, is delete, before impact. And then agenda item 9, the text, was just a typo. The second paragraph, Vice Chair Lehman motion, there should be the word "to" before renew. And then under, it's regarding the staffing update on executive officer's report, the paragraph that begins E.O. Foster, and at the end of the sentence, delete the words "if needed," and that's it.
On the last page. Mr. Foster, do you have the revision?
No, sir.
You haven't?
No, sir. I have all the revisions.
Good,
Yes,
yes,
sir.
thank you.
We want to amend your motion to approve the amendment.
Should we wait till we see Mr. Farson? Commissioner Farson, do you have any comments?
No.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Duffy?
No.
Commissioner Mattis? Okay. We need an amend your motion, Commissioner? So amended. Second? Second. Public comment at this point. Anyone here is welcome to come up, speak into the mic, and comment on our prior meeting minutes. Seeing no one wanting to speak on this matter, we'll call for the vote, please.
Chairman Carvelli?
Aye.
Vice Chair Lehman?
Aye.
Commissioner Fryerson?
Aye.
Commissioner Senior Quidez?
Aye.
Commissioner Sauer?
Aye.
Commissioner Dr. Williams?
Aye.
6-0, sir.
Thank you. Well, before we get to agenda item number 5, Mr. Foster, would like you to, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, we're going to move to agenda item number 10. It's a report on our California State Athletic Commission 10-point plan to address severe dehydration and weight cutting in MMA. Could you please give a report to the commission?
Mr. Chairman, when the commission approved the plan last month, the idea was to report back, and this is the report back. We continue to weigh the fighters. We continue to implement the plan. The physicals seem to be working well, getting the weights in advance, and then that way we're able to highlight in the office who we consider to be at risk. And then we turn that over to the doctors. Dr. Wallace and I have been working very closely on that, as Dr. Williams can attest from the last MAC meeting. And so far we've recommended 18 athletes to move up to what we consider to be their appropriate weight categories. The Mohegan tribe, Mike Mazzulli, has adopted the 10-point plan. That's rather significant because Mike Mazzulli, the Mohegan tribe, regulates Bellator's international events, so that's rather significant. CAB MMA that regulates the Brazilian Athletic Commission down there has adopted the 10-point plan moving forward. I've been having a lot of discussions with the state of Texas. The chair of the New Mexico Commission texted me just recently and let me know that they are looking to adopt the plan, and not only that, but they're also looking to adopt the C3 Logics program that the Commission's also using for concussion management. And also been having discussions with various states. I don't have to tell this Commission, and I'm going to say it again because it needs to be said, we have some media here to say it. This problem, this weight cutting problem, is the biggest problem in combat sports. You guys have been writing about it, keep writing about it. It causes change. And we have got to get these guys in the appropriate weight class. Commission, I would point to you that this is about the 10-point plan. There shouldn't have to be 2 fights. You shouldn't have to fight to make weight and then fight again the next day. These are sentinel events. And, you know, with boxing, and I've said this before and I'm going to say it publicly, With boxing, I'm very worried about the fight. I look at the matches. I do all these things because you have an A side and a B side. Okay? With MMA promotions, whether it's the UFC or it's club shows, it doesn't matter. The promotion basically has both sides of the card. Okay? So they have a vested interest to make good fights. So you want to have good fights. But these guys are cutting in incredible amounts of weight.
By good fights, I presume you mean competitive.
Competitive fights. By and large, the competitive fights. But the weight cutting is really damaging, and we don't know what these effects are going to be long term for our athletes. So I'm pleased to report this commission's taken the lead on this subject. It's an important subject. It's not going away, and I'm pleased to work for the group that has implemented this plan.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. Commissioners, any comments or questions, Mr. Foster, regarding this report? None? Any members of the public like to comment on the 10-point plan? Seeing none, thank you for that great report. Agenda item number 5, appeal of license suspension and fines from Jon Jones for violation of California Code Section Regulations, Title 4, Section 303, 390, and Business and Profession Code Sections 18843B and 18649. Before I turn this over to our counsel, Mr. Walker, I see a lot of, this is a serious matter, but I see a lot of serious faces, so I'm going to tell you guys a joke, which I think is pertinent to this matter. So a guy's not feeling well and he calls the doctor. What do? The doctor says, I want you to run 5 miles a day for a week and call me. So at the end of the week, the guy calls the doctor. I says, how you feeling? He goes, I don't know, but I'm 35 miles away. Think about that as we move into this. Counsel?
Chairman.
Yes.
I believe counsel for Mr. Jones has asked for this to be reported by court reporter.
Yes, we did. It was suggested that we arrange for a court reporter, and there should be one here. Oh, perfect.
So we normally don't have things reported, so a lot of people are not familiar with this. So just for everybody's edification, I know counsel is familiar with this, and Mr. Walker is as well, but court reporter can only take down one person at a time. And just to make things easier for her, and so she doesn't pull her hair out, if everyone would say their names before speaking, and try not to speak over each other. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. I am Spencer Walker, the attorney for the California State Athletic Commission, Department of Consumer Affairs. I'll be presiding over this appeal hearing. The Commission is vested with the authority to hear appeals related to license discipline pursuant to Section 389 of Title 4 of the California Code of Regulations. This hearing is being held at the Doubletree Hotel by Hilton Anaheim Resort, 2085 South Harbor Boulevard, Anaheim, California. Notice of this hearing is published on the Commission's agenda for today's meeting. As required by Section 389, a written request by requester Jon Jones for this appeal hearing was timely received by the Commission, which is related to the temporary suspension and revocation of his license and the fine issued by the Commission's executive officer for violating California Code of Regulations, Title 4, Section 303, 390, and Business Professions Code Sections 18843, Subdivision B, and 18649. Pursuant to Section 389, the following procedures shall be followed during this hearing. The hearing shall not exceed 1 hour. The time shall be divided evenly between the requester and the Commission's representative, Deputy Attorney General James Ladakis. Each party may make either an oral or written statement of the case. The Commission representative shall proceed first. If any witnesses elect to address the Commission, they will be placed under oath. The sequence of and time limitations on argument before the Commission are as follows. The Deputy Attorney General will proceed first and be limited to 20 minutes. The requester and his legal counsel, Mr. Jacobs, will proceed next and will be limited to 20 minutes. The rebuttal of the Deputy Attorney General will be limited to 10 minutes. and the rebuttal of the requester and his legal counsel will be limited to 10 minutes. The Commission staff bears the burden of proving the case by preponderance of the evidence. The Commission will serve the written decision on the parties not later than 45 calendar days after the matter has been submitted. The decision will contain factual findings, legal conclusions, and an order describing the action taken by the Commission. So, Mr. Ledeckis, let's start with you. I understand that, well, I actually have it, there's a stipulation between you and Mr. Jacobs.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Walker, James Ledeckis on behalf of the Executive Officer, Andy Foster. Commissioners, Chairman Garvelli, pleasure to be before you today. Mr. Jones and Mr. Jacobs have been very cooperative in working with the Executive Officer in preparation for today's meeting. First of all, we have pre-marked our exhibits, and we've agreed that they will be received into evidence without objection between either of us. And those exhibits have been previously furnished to the Commission, and they contain the Executive Officer's Exhibits 1 through 8. And the last exhibit is the curriculum vitae for Dr. Eichner, who will testify today. The exhibits for Mr. Jones are exhibits have been pre-marked as A through Y, and those will be received into evidence without objection from Mr. Foster as well. I've also mentioned in my briefs, and I mentioned that there were two misdemeanor convictions that were mentioned. There was a weigh-in brawl, and there were 2 prior adverse tests against Mr. Jones. And I do not believe that they will be contested as well, but I'll let that Mr. Jones, Mr. Jacobs respond to that. And as for today's allegation regarding the positive test for Turinabol, the metabolite M3, I do not believe Mr. Jones is contesting that test result from the USADA lab. And with that, we will respectfully submit on our briefs and reserve our right to call Dr. Eichner. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we begin, again, I will, as we have in the past, we are not a court of law, so I have the ability to extend time, and we will get through this in a fair way where everyone gets a voice here. So thank you.
Thank you.
Sir.
Okay, I have a copy of both briefs and the exhibits. Unless there's an objection, I'll go ahead and receive those into evidence. Okay, do either of you wish to provide an opening statement?
Mr. Walker, I believe I would like to submit on the briefs, but just briefly, just for the record.
Or summary.
Summary, yeah. Mr. Jones has been charged with ingestion of a substance that's in violation of the USADA rules. And that was flagged on August 22nd. The substance in question is Turinabol, an M3 marker. It's a metabolite. And we will offer the testimony of Dr. Daniel Eichner today, who's a sports medicine research testing lab representative where Mr. Jones's tests were sent to be tested. And I don't believe that that's being contested, so I don't want to spend any time on it, other than to say at the conclusion of the hearing, Mr. Foster is going to request that the fines be affirmed, that the violation for prohibited substances, ENP 303, the regs, and 390, discredit to boxing, an amount of $5,000 collectively, and also a violation of the Business and Professions Code, 18843 sub B, which authorizes this commission to withhold up to 40% of a purse. And in reference to that, we've offered Exhibit 7, which is the purse that Mr. Jones received in his fight with Mr. Cormier in the amount of $500,000. And so 40% of that purse was $200,000, and that is the maximum fine Mr. Foster levied against Mr. Jones. And finally, we're seeking the revocation of Mr. Jones's MMA license. Thank you.
And Mr. Jacobs, did you want to make an opening statement?
Yes, thank you, and I'll keep it brief.
Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you to the Commission. I do understand you're much more interested in hearing from Mr. Jones than from me, and I will keep my remarks short. I do want to start, though, by thanking Mr. Ladakis for working in a collaborative manner, and Mr. Foster as well. Mr. Ladakis invited me down to San Diego. We went through all the exhibits. You have everything, and the hope is that we can do this in a fairly orderly, straightforward way that'll proceed efficiently for everybody. You know, I tried to keep the submissions concise and to the issues that we think are important. I know you've read them, and I don't want to repeat myself too much. It is correct, we're not contesting the finding of the prohibited substance in Jon Jones' July 28 sample. So the issue here really is, what is the appropriate penalty? Mr. Foster, the executive office is asking for a revocation of the license and the maximum fine in this case. There's no request for a sanction, it's revocation and fine. And particularly on the issue of the fine, I think it's important to really look at the whole picture of what we have here. And you know, while we're not contesting that this substance was in the sample here, I think it's important for you to hear, and you'll hear it from Jon, that he did not knowingly take the substance. He has no idea where it came from. And there's quite a few pieces of information and evidence that support that. You know, first, there's a polygraph. He submitted himself to a polygraph exam and was found to be truthful when he said that he had never knowingly taken any substance that could have caused this positive test. Secondly, if you look at the test history, you know, a drug test is, you hear this from the lab directors, I'm sure Dr. Eichner would say it, a drug test is a snapshot in time.
Excuse me, you're getting into the meat of the case, so let's start with Mr. Ladakis, and then you'll have your 20 minutes.
Okay. That's
Those
fine.
are opening statement. You're going to get
Just
to
need
this
a
again.
Yes,
Okay.
that's right. Thank you. Mr. Ladakis, proceed, please. You have 20 minutes.
Mr. Walker, we would call Dr. Eichner. And we request that the court order swear in Dr. Eichner.
Would you raise your hand, please, Doctor? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in the matter now contained shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Doctor, got a microphone, is that okay? Let you share?
He can take this as well.
And doctor, can you please spell your first and last name for the record?
Daniel Eichner, D-A-N-I-E-L-E-I-C-H-N-E-R.
Thank you.
Dr. Eichner, how are you currently employed?
I'm the president of the Sports Medicine Research and Testing Laboratory in Utah.
Ever qualified as an expert on anti-doping policies?
Yes, I have.
Mr. Jacobs, may I have a stipulation that Dr. Eichner is an expert in this field?
Yes.
Thank you. Appreciate that. That'll save a lot of time. Dr. Eichner, if you had an opportunity to review Exhibit 5, which is the testing data from your lab, and it's dated August 21st, 2017 from Mr. Jones.
Yes, I have.
And what were those results, just generally?
There was an adverse analytical finding for a metabolite of oral turinabol.
Okay. Can you tell us what is turinabol?
So oral turinabol, also known as dihydrochloromethyltestosterone, is an anabolic androgenic agent. It's prohibited in all sporting codes, either through the World Anti-Doping Agency or other divisions, and it's also a Schedule III drug in the United States.
And as a Schedule III drug, what does that mean?
That means it's prohibited from being sold in the US.
And explain to us what a metabolite is.
So when a drug is administered, and I'll use the word administered throughout my testimony today, and you have to understand that that's a technical term. I have no knowledge of whether someone deliberately administered or not. All I can tell you is that it was administered. And when a drug is administered, it's generally passed through the urine, and in many instances that drug is broken down or metabolized into something else. And in certain circumstances, and oral turinabol is a classic example of this, some of the metabolites are a lot longer lived than the actual parent drug, so you can detect them for a lot longer than the parent drug, and hence in drug testing, the metabolites are usually used because they offer a longer window of detection.
What are some of the purposes in the administration of Turinabol?
So oral Turinabol was developed in East Germany to treat medical conditions, to treat disease, and then unfortunately it was subsequently abused for doping in sport, mainly through Eastern Europe.
And what is your conclusion after reviewing the testing data and also the report by Dr. Scott relative to Mr. Jones's use of Turinabol?
Oral Turinabol was administered sometime after his July 7th test, when we tested it later in July.
If he tests negative on July 7th and then tests positive on July 28th, and then again in October he tests negative, can you draw any conclusions from that?
No, I can't.
Why is that?
Well, for a couple of reasons. There needs to be further research conducted to look at the metabolism and excretion rate of oral Turinabol, and some of the necessary studies that could help shed light on how long it's detected for after administration haven't been done. The other important thing to consider is that when I look at data like this, I have to understand how much of the drug was administered, how it was administered, what route of administration was used, and the frequency of administration. Without knowing any of those things, it's very difficult to make any determination.
Well, you mentioned the research hasn't been done. Is there a reason the research hasn't been done?
Yes, so in the United States, because it's not an FDA-approved drug, it would be impossible to get ethical approval to conduct such necessary studies in humans.
Can you say with any degree of reasonable certainty that Mr. Jones's physical performance was enhanced by a positive test for M3?
No, I can't.
Can you say whether the metabolite M3 was ingested for therapeutic reasons or was ingested by accident?
There's not enough information available to make that determination, no.
Thank you. I'd like to take a second now and refer you to Exhibit Y and for the Commission. This is Exhibit Y. This is Dr. Scott's expert report. It was offered by Dr. Jones. This is my Howard Jacobs. Apologize. And just ask if you had an opportunity to review Dr. Scott's report.
Yes, I have.
And after your review, can you just tell us generally what the report stated?
The Scott report summarized that in all likelihood the athlete administered a contaminated product that caused the adverse finding that was done late in July.
Can you, with any degree of reasonable certainty, confirm that, whether it was therapeutic or whether it was a contaminant?
There's not enough information available to make the determination, I don't think.
Do you agree with the Scott report relative to Mr. Scott's report when his conclusions as to whether it was therapeutic or contaminated?
There's not enough information to make the determination.
So would you agree or disagree with Dr. Scott's conclusions that it was a contaminant?
I think with the information available to me that I've been able to review, it's impossible to make the determination that it was purely caused from a contaminated product, so I can't agree with that.
Can you explain to us why you can't agree with it?
So we've had experience with other cases related to oral Turinabol where sometimes the metabolite is detectable for several weeks after use and sometimes it's detectable for significantly longer and everything in between. And so coming back to pharmacokinetics and not knowing exactly how much and how often and the route of administration, it's impossible for me to give you a determination on exactly how much was used and when it was used.
What are some of the factors that would be important for you to know in order to make that determination?
the classic pharmacokinetics, how much was used, the route of administration, if it was done orally, if it was taken through another route, and the frequency of use. The individual metabolism does make a difference as well, but the first three are the critical pieces for making that determination.
Do we have that information available in order for you to make that determination?
No, we don't.
Will we ever get it? Could you have gotten it?
The data is not available, and the research hasn't been done in concert with that, so it's very difficult to make a determination.
Okay, if Mr. Jones tested on July 7th and that test was clean, and then later he tests positive on July 28th for Turinabol, can you draw any conclusions from that?
Between the test from July 7th to the test later in July, he would have administered oral Turinabol.
And when you say administered, either accidentally or intentionally or therapeutic or contaminated?
That's correct, I don't know.
All right, the fact that he tested again in October of 2017 and his test came back clean for Turinabol, what conclusions, if any, can you draw from that?
Not much, and again, due to previous cases we've had and also the lack of research, is that it could still be available for testing in October, and it could be gone like it was in this case, and unfortunately it doesn't tell us how much was used.
Nothing further. I'd turn over a little time to the Commission. If there were any questions, I apologize that weren't asked that you would like clarification on.
Commissioners, any questions for Dr. Eichner or Mr. Vick at this point? Of course. Commissioner Shanakides.
So is there any question in your mind that the substance is actually some form of chlorinated anabolic steroid, exogenous steroid?
I'm very confident that the M3 metabolite that was detected is consistent with oral Turinabol. If your question was, is it possible for another chlorinated anabolic androgenic steroid that would also be considered prohibited and scheduled, could of course the finding, yes, but I haven't seen it.
Okay. So when you say that a drug is FDA approved, that means that there can be controlled studies where you measure the excretion rate and you are able to tell how long it stays in the system, how much goes in, how long it stays, depending on the rate of entry, the rate of exit, things like that. And that's how you're able to say with some degree of certainty when a person may have ingested a particular supplement or a particular drug, correct?
That's exactly correct. In your keyword, controlled, is very important.
Okay. So because Turinabol is not an FDA-approved substance, there is no such controlled study. That's what you're saying, right?
That's correct.
So there is no way in this case to tell how much was ingested, when it was ingested, and the excretion rate. That's what you're saying.
That's correct.
So no matter how you tear this apart or how you study this, all we know is that there was Turinabol in his system at the time he was tested, July 28th, right?
That's correct.
And unless someone makes certain assumptions, like Mr. Scott was asked to make certain assumptions, there really is no way to tell how much was in, how much goes out, how long it takes. There's just no way, unless we guess. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Is Mr. Scott here? Mr. Scott here?
Yes,
Sure.
You've done, and your lab has done, product testing for contaminants, on supplements, on substances, correct?
Yes, we have, Commissioner.
Have you ever seen any substance or medication or anything contaminated with Turinabol?
No, we haven't.
Have you ever heard of any substance or medication or supplement being contaminated with Turinabol?
No, we haven't, but I'd like to clarify my answer that we've tested hundreds of products and there is tens of thousands products commercially available. So we've really done a very small subset of testing.
Anything's possible. I'm just asking whether you've heard of it or seen it.
No, I haven't.
I don't think I have any.
Commissioners, any questions at this point? Yes, Vice Chairman.
Can you give us an idea of the degree of presence of the metabolite or tranbol in the sample? And was it like a small amount? I mean, can you make any deductions?
So in certain circumstances, when there's certified reference material, we could actually give you an approximate concentration. Unfortunately, when this test was conducted, all we can tell you is that it's a low level. We can't even give you an approximate concentration. We can just tell you it was a low level.
Okay. And I don't know whether this is in your purview, but you talked about routes of administration. What other routes are there?
Well, oral turinabol, as the name states, is usually taken orally, so it's ingested, but it's possible to make the drug available through other routes of administration. You could inject it for one, intramuscular in the vein. There's other ways you could take a drug, you could make the drug available for use.
Can you, this might be repetitive of Commissioner Shaniki's, do you have an idea of, obviously it's not legal or lawful in the U.S., do you have an idea how difficult it is to get on the black market here in the U.S.?
So if you wanted to buy the raw ingredients, that's possible to do that. But as we went through before, you've never seen it in over-the-counter products. So, I mean, it's available to buy on the black market for sure as oral turinabol. But masking rating is something else I don't know.
Raw ingredients, what do you mean by that?
Well, unfortunately, in the black market, you can buy a lot of these scheduled drugs, including anabolic androgenic steroids. You can buy them by the kilogram, 2.2 pounds per use, and you can buy those on the black market.
Is there anything about this particular drug that makes it hard to detect? And is that why it was used previously? Is that what it's known for, or is that an attribute?
Quite to the contrary. Several years ago, the M3, the long-term metabolite we're talking about here, was identified, and that's actually made the window of detection much longer than it used to be. So, to the contrary of that, it's actually very easy to detect now.
Okay, that's it. My questions.
Mr. Rodakis, could you perhaps explain for us the players a little better? Dr. Eckman is not involved with, like nerves, is not involved with USADA. Could you explain the players, perhaps?
Yeah, if I might. Dr. Eckman, can you explain your interaction here?
So the Sports Medicine Research and Testing Laboratory in Utah is one of two World Anti-Doping Agency accredited laboratories. The other one here is in Los Angeles, and we conduct testing independently for professional leagues, for the Olympic sports. And important to remember that when any sample comes to either the laboratory in Utah or Los Angeles, they're only a lab number. There's no name. It's all de-identified, and we're totally independent of the results management process. And we wouldn't know anything about a case or who it was until it came down to something like this. It's all de-identified to us from the beginning.
Chairman Carvalho, did I answer the question?
Of course.
One other point I'd like to make, and I'd like to read into the record, I'm going to refer to Exhibit Y for the commissioners. This is Mr. Scott's report, and you've had an opportunity, Dr. Eichner, to review this. Is that true?
Yes, I have.
And I'd like to read into the record paragraph 14, page 4 of Exhibit Y, which is the Scott report. It states, quote, "Absent that work, it is not possible to do anything other than make educated guesses regarding detection windows." Do you recall that paragraph from the report?
Yes, I do.
And do you agree with that statement?
I agree 100%.
And why do you agree with that statement?
There's a lack of research to know for sure when a drug like this could have been administered and how much was administered.
So Mr. Scott is basically acknowledging that there's a lot of educated guessing going on in his report,
Yes.
and he so states in paragraph 14.
Yes, he does.
Thank you. No further questions.
Okay, you got a couple minutes left, Mr. Ledekas, but so I'm just going to go ahead and
Please.
and Mr. Jacobs.
And if I may give Mr. Jacobs my mic so that he can question.
Thank you. And Dr. Eichner, you said that you can't give a concentration estimate, but you did say it was a low level of this metabolite that was present in the July 28 urine sample?
That's correct.
Okay. And you talked quite a bit about Mr. Scott's report, and we can ask him questions about it, but you didn't read his report as saying that this was definitely a contaminated supplement, did you?
I would use the word definite, no.
I mean, wouldn't it be fair a fair reading of the report that he was looking at the evidence to try to offer an opinion as to whether the totality of the evidence was consistent with intentional versus unintentional use?
My interpretation of the summary of his report was that it was most likely caused from a contaminated product.
Okay. And he got there by making a number of assumptions based on what intentional use would look like, and then looking at other possibilities for unintentional use. Can you think of any possibilities for unintentional use other than a contaminated supplement?
Other than contaminated product, no. Unless, you know, the athlete was unconscious and administered something when they weren't knowing what was going on.
So in trying to offer an opinion as to whether the evidence can help us as to whether it's more likely intentional versus unintentional, what we're really looking at is, does it look more like it's a contaminated supplement, or does it look more like he took this on purpose? Is that fair?
I think it's important, you know, when I answer this question, is that, you know, I look at all the data, and all I had was data. I had nothing other than scientific data to look at. And when I reviewed the Scott report, I used data hat on and only looked at the data, and the report summarised that it was most likely from a contaminated product. And as I testified earlier, there's not enough information to make the determination.
Okay, you did see he was asked to make an assumption that take a normal dose of turinabol would be 20 to 60 milligrams. Did you see that?
Yes, I did.
Did you find that to be a reasonable assumption to make in connection with intentional use?
I think when you start talking about administering a drug for therapeutic purposes or for doping purposes, they can be different. And so if you start talking about how much a drug is going to be used, you also have to, you know, talk about how often it would be used as well. And so, you know, if a therapeutic dose was, you know, 10 to 60 milligrams, you know, could you potentially use? Yes, sure. Could you potentially use more? Absolutely.
Right, and part of intentional use, and that's a good point, with steroid would be, you wouldn't just use it once, you'd use it multiple times, right?
If you're asking me for a scientific explanation on how to dope with steroids, I would agree you would use it more than once.
Okay, and would you also agree that if, let's take the lower end of that, 20 milligram dose was used a number of times between July 8th and the 28th, that you would expect to see more of this metabolite than you saw in the July 28th sample?
I don't know.
Okay. There has been some research on this metabolite. The Steroid paper is I think the only peer-reviewed paper on this metabolite, right?
It's the only one I'm aware of, yes.
And that's the paper that explains how this test was developed, right?
Correct.
And in that paper, they estimate the detection window of this metabolite could be estimated as 40 to 50 days, right?
I remember that, yes.
Okay, and then that estimate was also based on ingestion of a single dose of Turinabol, correct?
I thought it was a little grey on the administration for that study, but I think some of them may have been N equals 1 for 1 dose, yes.
Okay, which would mean that if you took more than 1 dose, then the detection window would be more than the 40 to 50 days that are estimated here, right?
So I think the wording of the paper stated that the detection could be for up to 50 days, and when it says up to 50 days, you know, as a scientist, I understand that to be you get variability between individuals. Some people could be up to 50 days, some people could be less. And, you know, I keep coming back to the piece that there's just not enough controlled studies to make a definitive number on how long it would be detected for and what concentration or levels you might see after use.
Okay. If, we'll strike that. Mr. Scott had talked in his report about that issue of what a half-life of this substance might be. Do you recall that?
Yes, he stated about 14 days.
Okay, and do you agree or disagree with that?
I think it's a fair estimate.
Okay. And there's a difference between half-life and detection window, right?
Correct.
Can you explain how the half-life, particularly if you use a 14-day half-life estimate, how that might factor into detection window?
So the half-life of a drug is the time it takes for half of the drug to metabolize or go through the system. And so that's going to be different to what your detectability is. And so depending on the instruments or the methods used for detecting, sometimes you can get in the realm of nanograms per milliliter, and sometimes you can get 1,000-fold lower in picograms per milliliter, and it really depends on the substance you're looking for and the technique you're using. But sometimes you can have a very sensitive method that can pick up very, very small amounts.
Okay, but with a 14-day half-life, if you're using a substance for a period of days, then it's going to be building up in the system over those days, which means the detection window is going to go up every day you use it, right?
Theoretically, yes.
Okay. That's all the questions I have. I'll save the rest for Mr. Scott to respond.
Okay. You're excused. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Dickus, you have some more time because we took some of your time.
I have no further evidence, Your Honor. We've submitted...
I'm not, Your Honor.
Chairman, we've submitted in our brief and all of our exhibits, so...
Thank you. Thank you.
You can call your next witness, Mr. Jacobs.
Yes, I think coming off this subject, it probably makes sense to hear from Mr. Scott next, and then we'll hear from Jon Jones.
Thank you.
Mr. Dickus, can you share your microphone? So I think we're going to start with Mr. Jacobs, right?
And then, court reporter, can you please swear him in?
Do solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in the matter not contained shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I so vote.
Thank you.
Can you please spell your first and last names?
Paul, P-A-U-L, Scott, S-C-O-T-T.
Thank you. Mr. Scott, have you testified in cases before where the issue was detection window for this metabolite?
I have.
In what types of cases?
So there was a anti-doping case involving the metabolism of DHCMT, specifically the M3 metabolite, from where source was at issue, and that was an Australian rugby case, I believe. I don't remember the details.
Okay. And have you testified in cases where one of the issues was whether or not an athlete had intentionally used Turinabol?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Ledeckis, do we have an issue as to credentials, or can we stipulate? Okay, thank you. I think maybe the quickest way to do this is to just ask you, you heard Dr. Eichner's comments on your report. Do you have any response to what he said about your report?
Just to be clear, I agree with pretty much everything Dr. Eichner has said. I want to be clear in my report, the ultimate conclusion in my report that this was most likely from a contaminated supplement does depend on the assumptions that are made. I certainly agree that we need a great deal of more study on this. It cannot be done in the United States. It can be done elsewhere. I certainly hope that we will see that study, and my understanding is that WADA has commissioned and may eventually have a certified reference material for this M3 metabolite, at which point we can characterize and confirm that the assumptions made about the source of this particular chlorinated steroid are in fact from turinabol, and we'll have a full understanding of it. We do not have that right now. Solodesky is of course the only source of peer-reviewed material for this. Everything else would have to come from experience.
And you say in
Mr.
your...
Jacobs?
Yes.
Just a clarification, I think it'd be helpful for the commission, particularly on the scientific portion here of this testimony. You can know a little bit more about how Mr. Scott got here and why he's here, and who brought him here. And,
Oh, sure.
okay.
Okay. Mr. Scott, your first involvement in this case was, well, first of all, tell us what your position is and what your relation is to Mr. Jones or to myself.
I'm the president of Corville Laboratories. We are a clinically licensed laboratory, and we also specialize in anti-doping services. We do a lot of testing for supplements. We do some private anti-doping direct detection of urine, and that's I got here because I was asked by Mr. Jacobs to review initially a documentation package, which I found no quarrels with, and then he asked me about this particular set of questions with regard to the possible scenario of either intentional or unintentional administration of turinabol.
And actually, you may not remember it, but your first involvement in this case was actually attending the B sample as an independent witness, right?
That is correct. I attended the B sample, and it should be recorded in the documentation package that you all have.
Right, and then the next thing you did was test some of Jon Jones' supplements for possible contamination.
I did. I don't have a direct recollection of how many there were, but there were a number of supplements that were tested in my laboratory for the presence of the parent compound, oral turinabol, DHCMT, to see if they were a possible source. And we did not, in our testing, we were not able to confirm the presence in any of those substances.
And then after that testing with USADA's assistance, you sent those same supplements actually to Dr. Eichner so that his lab could test them as well, right?
I don't, yes, I believe that's correct.
Okay. Is that, okay.
Thank you.
So the question I was going to ask you was, so you say in your report that the October 11 negative test makes it unlikely that during that 3-week period between July 8th and the 28th that Jon Jones repeatedly used what I would call an effective dose, 20 to 60 milligrams, or I think I said 20 to 40 of turinabol, right?
Oh, that's correct.
And why do you say that?
Well, again, with a great deal of uncertainty around this conclusion, we are given, I have to basically look at this in two ways. How does the turinabol get in there? We know it's there. We know that something that metabolized into M3 is in his system. So it was administered by him sometime between the first negative test and the first positive test. So looking at that, what we can say definitively is that if it were a contamination level, I say definitively as one can say, if it were a contamination level, it would possibly be in the July 28th test when we see it there. And it would certainly, unless that substance that was contaminated was continually administered, It would not be in the October 11 test, which is again something we see. So we can say, yes, if we have this contamination scenario, the data fits quite nicely with it, right? It's exactly the results you would expect. In the case of an intentional use, that's less certain. We've got a scenario where we have these two closely related tests, a negative followed by a positive that I think are about 2 weeks apart. 3 weeks apart. And so an intentional use of steroids doesn't just involve, I mean, you can have an inappropriate intentional use of steroids where you've only taken one, but if we presume that the doping scenario is an effective use of the steroid for the purposes of containing a performance-enhancing effect, you will be on a regimen, and it will be a dose taken over many weeks, maybe 1 week, maybe 2 weeks, something of that sort, during which a large dose will be taken repeatedly. So under that scenario, when you get to the end of that doping regimen and you stop taking it, and we can say with a reasonable degree of certainty that that must have happened some days before the 28th, because if it happened very close to the 28th, you would see the parent. We don't see the parent. We only see the M3. So
when you say the parent?
Oral turinabol, you would see DHCMT.
The actual drug. The
actual drug.
Okay.
If it were discontinued very close to the collection on the 28th, you would see that. So we know that's not what happened.
Wouldn't you also, if you saw a discontinuation of intentional use close in time to the July 28 test, see a high amount of the metabolite?
High and low amounts of this metabolite are very hard to draw any firm conclusions on. The pool urine that is used was from the administration study that was, I believe, was actually used from the, let me correct this. There is a pool urine. It is taken from multiple persons who have administered DHCMT. I do not know the actual source. I believe it was the pools that were used from the study itself. That said, all we can do without a certified reference standard, where we could get some actual assurance of how much of the M3 was in there, all we can say is, how does this compare to the pool urine we have? Saying low or high, you can say, okay, it's low because it's similar to the pool urine or below the pool urine, but I don't have a way of telling you what until we get a certified reference compound and run actual analyses, I don't have a way of telling you what to expect of M3 alone.
Okay, but back to the question of what the October 11 negative test tells you if you're assuming intentional use.
Right, so if you assume intentional use and you have this repeated use of a high level of a useful level of DHCMT, then in that scenario you are approaching the window that you see almost in the Solidowski case, right? So if you assume that we terminate our administration somewhere around, I don't know, the 24th, something like that of July. So approximately 60-some days later, you have this negative test. In between, you've got this positive test. So under that scenario, you would have a reasonable expectation that you might see something in that October 11th. It is more likely that if you've got to choose between these two scenarios of intentional use and unintentional small levels of use, I do believe it's more likely to say that it is more likely to be the unintentional use because there's some reasonable probability that you would see it, the M3 metabolite, in the sample taken some 60-some days later. You can't say with certainty. It is absolutely impossible. Yeah.
We're going from science to conjecture back and forth pretty particularly here, but I'm activating. Please,
so
no more pool urine, please.
Define pool urine.
Yes, so a pool urine is a urine pool from multiple samples.
That's kidding.
No, but it is, I mean, it's a reasonable question. There's different ways to get positive controls that are used in these tests, right?
That's right.
And so for some substances, there's actually certified reference standards which you use, but there, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was no certified reference standard for this metabolite. So they're basically creating this material from people that you know used the substance, and that's the pool of the urine.
My fault, I wrote it.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Do the commissioners have any questions for the witness before he's excused?
Well, I think Mr. Rodriguez gets to.
Well, that's when we go to council.
All right.
He's going to need it.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Scott, will you explain to me what you meant by detection window?
Sure. So when you take a substance, and when, I shouldn't say when you take a substance, when you first stop administering a substance, that creates a day on which the administration ceased. The detection window would be the amount of time after that last administration. When using our methods, you could still determine that the administration in fact took place.
So in your report, you identify a 51-day detection window for a Tyranobol, is that true?
Yes, approximately, and that comes, that detection window comes from Solodesky.
And you're making that assumption based upon the literature from Solodesky?
That's correct.
Can you tell me the time between July 28th and October 11th in days?
Not precisely, but it's 60-some days or maybe 70 days.
If I told you it was 75, would you disagree?
No.
Now, would 75 days be outside the 51-day window detection?
Yes.
You would assume that based on the Solodesky literature that you relied upon, and it would make sense that there would be no detection.
No, that's not correct.
Okay, why is that?
First of all, Solodesky is not a pharmacokinetic study. The estimation he makes there is exactly that, an estimation. It's a reasonable guess. It's a good tool, but we don't know anything, and I think you heard Dr. Eichner testify about this. We don't know anything about the amount that was taken, the frequency it was taken, and for the length of time it was taken. And so trying to relate that back to an estimate in a paper where they actually haven't even fully characterized the compound, it's not fair to draw hard conclusions. It's a good starting point.
Thank you.
Excuse me for one moment. Mr. Jacobs, your time is up.
Mr. Jacobs, we're going to give you some more time unless there's an objection. Any commissioners?
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay. Mr. Scott, can you tell me some of the assumptions that you made in arriving at your report?
So I made some assumptions on use. Those were taken from a reference on a bodybuilding website, I believe, that was provided to me by Mr. Jacobs as part of my assumptions for what a useful protocol would be.
Okay, explain
So,
what do you mean by that use? Dosage?
Dosage, yes, dosage and frequency of use.
Okay, do you, based on that assumption, do you even know what dosage was administered in this case?
No, no, that's impossible.
So that would be a guess on your part?
It would be an assumption as stated clearly, yes.
Okay. Did you also make any assumption as to the route in which this anabolic steroid?
I assumed it to be oral administration.
Do you have any evidence that in this case, this situation, it was taken orally?
We have no evidence that it was taken orally, but or we have no ability to definitively say how it was administered. It is the case that oral Tyranobol, and again, maybe this is clear from the name, but oral Tyrannobol's typical administration is oral administration.
So you're making an assumption that in this situation the Tyranobol was taken orally. Is that true?
That's correct.
That'd be speculation, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
And do you know the dosage? What dosage did you assume was taken?
The dosage I assumed was taken was between 20 and 60 milligrams, and that it was taken over an approximately 2-week period.
Do you have any evidence that that was the case in this situation?
So I have some limiting evidence, right? So as I indicated, assuming that we had a effective dose, it couldn't have been taken up to the 28th, or we would have seen parent in the July 28th collection. So there's some limiting factors, but I have no way of telling you precisely what dose was taken. That's correct.
So again, that would be a speculation that's fostering your educated guess.
That's correct.
All right. Do you know what the concentration was of the turinabol?
So there was no turinabol found. There was a metabolite found, and no, we cannot estimate the concentration.
So if your opinion is based upon that, that would be a speculation as well.
Yes, my opinion is not based upon that, though.
Oh, why is that?
Because there is no means of determining the concentration of the M3, and we have no studies that would designate to us the significance of the concentration, even if we could determine it.
Do you have any evidence as to what route was administered, the turinabol was administered in this case?
Again, no. Again, the normal route of administration for oral turinabol is oral.
Okay. So it would be speculation if you were to make any assumption on how this turinabol was ingested or injected, etc.?
It is speculation. It is, again, that is the normal route of administration.
Could the administration have been intravenously?
Absolutely.
Could it have been intramuscular?
Yes?
As well as oral?
Yes.
Do all of those routes could they have an effect on your opinion?
So I don't have any information about what happens specifically to turinabol, oral turinabol, when it is formulated for either an intravenous or intramuscular injection. Now, typically, when the administration is, when you relate this back to other steroids, which have both oral and injectable administrations, it is typically the oral administrations that clear the system most rapidly. So to the extent that it was not an oral administration, I would say that based on other steroids and how they behave, it makes it more likely that the October 11th test would have turned out to be adverse. Now, with that said, if it were injected or if there was some other preparation, it also would make it impossible for it to be, other than perhaps through I mean, now we're really getting into fantasy, where you've got a vitamin shot or something, but with that is somehow contaminated. But getting rid of that fantasy, if it's injected, of course that's almost certainly intentional use, not unintentional.
Thank you. Earlier you testified, and I believe your words were, there is a great deal of uncertainty surrounding your conclusions. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes, and I make that clear in my report.
Okay. For the record, I'd like to read your report. It's been marked as Exhibit Y and received in evidence at page 4. The paragraph that was referenced earlier by Dr. Eichner, and that's paragraph 14. Okay. And I'll read that in the record. Absent that work being other literature and studies done in the United States on turinabol, is that what you meant?
Not in the United States, but yes.
Okay. Absent that work, it is not possible to do anything other than make educated guesses regarding detection windows. And you wrote that, right?
Yes.
It was true when you wrote it?
Still is.
Thank you. No further questions.
Speakers?
I don't have anything else. Not for him.
Oh, okay.
The next witness would be Jon Jones, but...
Let's give our commissioners
sorry.
Questions for Mr. Skinner, please. Commissioners?
I have a question. A lot of what we've heard has to do with this concept of intent, and even in your report, kind of the assumption that either the ingestion or administration was intentional or unintentional, and that if it was intentional, then we should have seen a certain dosage and so on and so forth. But isn't that somewhat of a false choice? I mean, isn't it possible that it could both be intentional and be a very, very small detection only on one study? I mean, I prescribe medications to patients all the time. They take it one day and then say, no, I don't want to take that.
Yeah, absolutely. So if the assumptions are rejected, then the conclusion must also be rejected.
So it's possible for someone to have a contamination from an intentional ingestion, but still have that one detection in one sample.
Yeah, yes, I wouldn't describe that any longer as a contamination. In other words, I think what you're asking is it's possible that someone set about a course of intentionally administering oral turinabol, and then after a single administration, changed their mind.
Or a couple of administrations, or we just...
Or yes,
So this
or we just
concept
don't
that
know.
it was either intentional and should have been at 20 to 60 milligrams, or a contamination is really a false choice. It could be a lot of other things as well.
A lot of other things, probably not, but the things that you're describing are reasonable. In other
Someone
words,
could have taken it once,
yes, someone could have taken it once, that's
or
right.
twice,
Yes,
or 3 times,
that's right,
or every other day.
that's right.
So a lot of other
Okay.
situations.
Any commissioners on consent? Commissioners? Please.
Yeah. There was some discussion about how you looked at what would be an effective dosage of turinabol in order to achieve athletic benefits.
Yes.
And how extensive was that research?
That research was very limited. I was provided with a reference. I reviewed that reference, and that fits with my experience in with other scenarios, with other anabolic steroids.
Okay, so it was one reference, and you were provided by that reference by counsel for Mr. Jones?
That's correct.
Okay. And your conclusion about an effective use of turinabol, could you repeat that? What it would have to be in order to be effective as a performance enhancing?
So you would normally relate the dose taken to the mass of the subject, and so it would normally be expressed in milligrams per kilogram. I don't know sufficient information about Mr. Jones, and I did not look up what his weight might be or something of that sort. So I took a large range that appeared to be consistent with the suggestions of people who use this material for performance enhancement.
And the frequency, is this the type of steroid that people can use for like a week and have benefits? Is it something that has to be used for months on time?
It appears to be, again, from what we can glean from people who use it. So you should also understand that all of this information comes from people who are using it unlawfully. But yes, it appears to be something that would be approximately a 2-week period of every other day or everyday use.
I'm fine, I think. And those commissioners.
I'm sorry, I have a question. Are you being paid for your time here today?
Yes.
What is your hourly rate?
My hourly rate is $3.95 per hour.
And were you also paid for reviewing and preparing the report that you submitted?
I was.
The same way?
The same, I believe so.
So if you were asked to make an assumption that, well, it wouldn't have been really that hard to figure out how much you weighed and Mr. Jones weighed, what his body size was. It wouldn't really have been that difficult, right?
So I think it's reasonable to assume that I could have, with a Google search, have figured this out at some point. The time constraints for this report were something along the lines of, what, 4 hours? Something like that. I was asked to review the material in a short period of time, and so I chose the assumptions based on my experience.
They gave you 4 hours?
I don't know if that's precise, but it was somewhere around there.
Clarification on number 18 in your report, item 18. Subject took a supplement or other product such as medicine or food contaminated with EHCMT contamination scenario with the last administration occurring between July 8 and July 28. It is unreasonable to expect such an administration would result in detectable levels of EHCMT M3 in the urine provided on October 11th.
Yes.
So you never expected to get, you didn't expect that there would be a positive test
No, what I'm saying here is that assuming that we have a contamination level, so a very small amount of DHCMT, perhaps administered once, perhaps administered several times, but a small level, that if that is what happens, so that the last administration occurs no later than July 28th, if it's at that level, it would be well outside the detection window.
75 days.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Which is not necessarily a part of the process here. It was something that Mr. Jones and his folks were doing because they were searching for other supplements or other things that may have caused this to happen. Is that correct? 7 months of looking to find something, hoping to find a reason to explain why the negative test. Is that correct? You weren't involved in that, were you? You were involved in the 7 months of testing also these other substances?
Yes, so I tested a number of supplements that were provided. Yes, I don't believe that is related to the October 11th collection. I'd have to go and look at the October 11th collection.
Well, I'm just asking another question.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. So have you been involved this whole 7 months then, 75 days, and then since August when the results of the negative test came back?
So, no, I have not been involved continuously during that time. My laboratory was commissioned to test specific substances, supplements, for the presence of something that would cause, so I'd say oral turinabol, but it's actually a handful of other 4-chlorinated steroids that may have resulted in the metabolite.
Right.
So I tested a series of his supplements during that period of time for the presence of those, and they were found negative.
The testing of the supplements, who made those decisions? Which things to test?
My client.
Okay, so you would send something to Mr. Scott and he would test it?
Yeah, I mean, would it be helpful for me to just describe what
Yeah,
happened?
please.
Okay. So the way the testing went here is, and John can confirm this, but essentially he sent me all of the supplements. And testing supplements is you know, it's an expense. So we started by sending not all, but I think it was 4 or 5 of the supplements to Corva Labs. They tested them, they were negative. We then entered into discussions with USADA about having Dr. Eichner's lab test the supplements. And we decided we would send the ones that were already tested at Corva just to be sure, so you know, maybe we'd hopefully make sure we didn't miss anything. But then we also decided, rather than doing this in stages, we're just going to test everything at once. So we sent, I mean, I think it was like 15 supplements or something to Dr. Eichner's lab, and he tested them all.
So 2 labs involved in testing?
Correct.
Supplements. Things other than supplements? Testing?
There was also at the end, is that you might have noticed in our brief, after Jon Jones met with USADA, and it came up that there were some massage creams that had been used close to the fight, and so that had not been tested. So we obtained the massage cream. We sent those 2 massage creams to Dr. Eichner, and he tested them as well.
So a thorough and expensive investigation that hopes to find
Yeah.
a reason, but to no avail.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing else that could have been tested, frankly.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jacobs, you're already 15 minutes over, but please go ahead.
Thank you. I think probably the appropriate thing to do would be to call Jon Jones at this point.
Well, it's okay. I mean, if you have another witness you want to call us.
No, I mean, John is probably the only other witness.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Scott.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, we're going to ask for a break. So would 10 minutes be okay? Okay, we will adjourn for 10 minutes. Good idea.
You don't have an iPhone charger.
We're not doing what we said we were going to do.
But we didn't say who's speaking. Okay. So far, so good.
It'd be my pleasure. I know you're busy. Well, no, it's more this thing. Okay, good man, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. Yeah. Not much to do, but I
had the between Andrew and
yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah, he was yeah, right.
All right, so I'll shoot my boy.
Let me just say hello. Hey, Mr. Frierson. It's so good to see you, sir. I've been missing you. Yeah, I don't know, man. We want to send somebody to pick you up and take you to the fight. Oh, I know.
You can't come over to my house. My son would be, he'll probably come to my house. How's it going?
You got the money shot.
I'm pretty slow.
Okay, good.
Yes. No, I had this in these.
Yeah, since we'll be speaking, might as well get a better shot.
Yes.
You don't have any stuff.
Memory card.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might do.
Because I have this plastic roll. Stick it in my kit.
Terrified my battery's going to run out halfway through him talking.
You have a cord?
Okay, well, I'm definitely not going to use that.
Because I have an extension.
No, so I think I've got an hour and 30 minutes in this one. If he talks for around an hour, I'll just be miserable now.
Shall reconvene. Mr. Walker, where are we?
You graciously gave Mr. Jacobs some additional time.
You may have some more time, sir. Please,
Thank you.
make your case.
At this point, we'll hear from Jon Jones, and my request would be that Jon be allowed to make a short statement first and then answer any questions.
No.
Great. John, please start by introducing yourself.
How's it going, guys? I'm John, and I don't really know what statement I'm going to make.
Mr. Jones, excuse me.
Will the witness be sworn in?
Madam Court Reporter.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in the matter now may be the truth and the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
So, we are here, and quite a really interesting situation. I think I'd rather you guys ask questions first.
Okay, that's
yeah,
fine.
Is that cool? It's like, where do I start with what to say? So.
Well, let me just walk him through some questions. So let me start with the easy one. Have you ever knowingly taken Turinabol or anything that could have caused this positive test?
No, I have not.
And when you found out that you had tested positive, what was your reaction?
It was a terrible reaction. Just probably one of the more confusing things I've ever had to do, especially because of the process of trying to figure out how it all happened. You know, I was immediately asked to look at the people around me and see how this got in my body. So that was really tough. Like just spending the first few days of the situation, going back on supplements that I had taken, and just the people that had been around me, which the last month before the fight was just closest friends and family and brothers, people who really care about me, who really want to see me succeed. Obviously my success translates into their lives as well. So yeah, it was a really interesting situation, just trying not to go through crazy conspiracies and look at people that I love as someone who could maybe put something in my food or drink or anything like that.
In your camp before the fight, did you feel like you were careful? Did you do things differently from what you had done in the past?
Super careful. Super careful leading up to this last fight. You know, I'm very aware of my image and perception of me, and been really working really hard to change it. And you know, this fight definitely leading up to it. Thought I had the perfect situation and just people in my life that just take care of everything as far as a good nutritionist, and you know, I just hired a lot more people to help have a ultimate professional team, and I felt like it led to a knockout, you know, ultimately. So I was really proud of the team I built around me.
The supplements that you used in the lead up to this fight, who chose those?
So the people that chose them was my managers, one of our managers, Abraham Kawa, who is very connected to the USADA situation, you know, the USADA program, and we basically we made sure that everything we took was in compliance with USADA.
And did you work with a nutritionist as well?
Yes, I work with a nutritionist who was my jiu-jitsu coach's wife, and she has, I know she has some type of degrees, and she's really smart woman, and yeah, everything was really locked down.
And she checked all the supplements before you took them?
Yeah, her name's Michelle. Michelle and Abraham were working really closely to make sure there was nothing that could put me in that situation that I found myself in a while back with, you know, with the meal enhancement stuff. Like, we were just making sure, you know, that situation really educated me a lot, that, you know, I had to be super careful about everybody that hands me a water bottle, anything that I eat, anything that I drink, who prepares my food. It taught me a lot, and we thought that we were, I knew that we were on just in a great place as a team.
There was a situation where you ended up switching the brands of supplements you used after your, what turned out to be negative test on July 8th, right?
Say that again.
So you were taking one set of supplements before July 8th?
Right.
And then you switched that after July 8th?
Right, yeah. So, so Michelle, she found these supplements that, and they're very generic stuff, like very basic stuff that just for general health for men, like fish oil and a basic protein and a basic like a glutamine for recovery and just real basic stuff. And she was really careful to make sure they were like third-party tested and things like this. And even then, my management team was like, it has to be USADA approved. So we ended up scratching these things that were darn near organic to go for things that were strictly okay with USADA.
So there was a recommendation that all the supplements that you take should be from a list of third-party certified supplements.
Correct.
And so basically you took the same kind of supplements, you just switched to brands that were informed choice certified, right?
Yeah, that clearly said USADA approved. Because there were some things that I remember the conversation was they were third-party tested, but they still weren't USADA approved. So we went to things that were like amazing across the board.
And that switch happened in the 3 weeks before the positive test?
Yes.
Okay. And then you knew you were going to be tested before the fight, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And were you
been an athlete my whole life.
Were you concerned at all about that test?
No, not at all. Not at all.
So, what have you done to try to figure out what caused the positive once you found out about it?
Well, we sent in all the supplements that we took leading up the 3 weeks before and the 3 weeks after. Both groups of supplements that we took, we've gotten them all tested. And man, I've just tried to just imagine any scenario, maybe someone who doesn't like me possibly doing something to a meal or a drink, which can drive a person crazy, trying to think of that type of stuff. Because like I said, most people who are in my life, especially really close to a fight, are people who I consider very genuine and really want to see me do well. I've done the polygraph test, which was voluntary. And
Tell us about the polygraph test a little bit.
Well, I went to get a polygraph test, and from my understanding, the guys who tested me were former FBI guys, so I would imagine they're a legit company. And I just had them ask me questions. Well, they asked me questions about any type of sports enhancement stuff. Have I ever done anything close to it? Have I ever seen it? Have I ever been around, anyone who does it that I know have done it? Or all these type of questions, and I answered every question honestly, and it came back that all my responses were honest, and that's something that I'd be willing to do again with a committee that's from California or whatever I have to do to try to prove to you guys that I had nothing to lie about today. What else have we done?
You met with USADA, right?
I met with USADA, the lawyers, yeah, and answered their questions, anything they wanted to. I know that was something else that wasn't mandatory, but that was something that I wanted to do to let these guys know that I'm not trying to hide anything from them. And any questions that they want to ask me, then I'll take as long as it takes to answer all the questions. That what we did that day. I think we were like 2-hour meeting or something like that. Just me asking questions and just trying to prove that I have absolutely nothing to hide. It's just this situation is like really, really crappy because it's just like, I don't understand how any of this happened and how this got in my system. I'm trying to be super open and candid and make myself available to anyone, whether it's my team, their lawyers, you guys, that do farther testing, whatever I could do to just try to prove that none of this stuff makes sense to me. As much as it makes no sense to you guys being here, it's just like, imagine being me. I have no clue how this happened. No clue how. I'm just trying to figure it out, just like everybody else.
What do you say in response to, in the brief of the executive officer, they go through past incidents you've had with DUIs, clashes and fights, and they say that it's a demonstration of a pattern of poor judgment and reckless behavior that should be taken into account in determining the penalty here. What do you say to that?
Well, our past is something that none of us can escape, and I've definitely done a lot of things that were just flat out stupid throughout my early 20s. But I've also been the person who's had to deal with everything that I've ever done and deal with the punishments for everything, whether that's being incarcerated, whether that is, having, hundreds of thousands of dollars taken, whether that's probation, whether that's talking to, almost 100 different schools, talking to kids about the things I've done, make my mistake, to make things right. It's been a process, but I feel like I've definitely been putting forth so much effort to make things better and better, because I understand that my life is an example to other people. And so looking yourself in the mirror, realizing that you are messing it up, I've really tried to do everything in my power to get my life together and ultimately show the world, show kids like, dude, you can make it through no matter how silly things are looking for you at a time. You can make it through this thing. And that's what I've been trying to do, is live and prove to people that you can get it together. And unfortunately, I've had some science stuff happen to me that has really reflected and kind of put me in this position of just being a lost cause or a screw up. And that's not who I am. I really want people to see that it is not too late to get it together. And that's what I've been trying to do. This situation with the male enhancement pill that just so happened to be tainted, it was, in a way, it was a weird blessing in disguise, because it was able to show, like, in that conclusion of the last situation, people were saying, well, negligence. He was negligent. He took a male enhancement pill that he didn't check with USADA. Outside of that, this was completely non-intentional. It's like, you can call me many things. You can call me a little bit of a party boy or a little bit of a wild guy or a knucklehead, but a cheater is something that I'll never, ever admit to. Admit to is not the word I want to use. It's like, that's something that I'll never say that I am, because that's just not who I am. So, I mean, I'm not to babble on it. I just really hope that my past situations don't really put me in a certain life, because, like I said, none of us can escape the dumb stuff that we've done throughout our early 20s. And
do you feel like you're a different person than you were a couple years ago? And if so, can you describe how?
Absolutely, I feel like I'm a different person. I think the biggest thing was when, I guess the last really dumb thing I did was 3 years ago, when I got in a hit-and-run car accident. The judge asked me to go around and talk to 87 schools in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And through that, it was healing for me, because I had the opportunity to self-reflect and to realize the impact that I actually had. And it's like, how can you go around to, I think I ended up doing like 90 schools. I did a few extra. It's like, how could you go around and talk to all these kids and see kids cry, and you get to the part of being close to tears? How could you go through all these conversations and know that you're still intentionally trying to do dumb stuff? It's like, the moment I had the opportunity to talk to all those kids, I healed myself in a way, because I realized the platform that I actually had. And to purposely do steroids like a week before a fight and ruin all those months of talking to all those kids, it would just be stupid. It's like, so I'm absolutely not the same person that I was 3 years ago when I got in a hit-and-run car accident. Like I said, since that car accident, it's been science that has been kicking me in the ass, if I can say that. And it's I'm not blaming anything on USADA. It's just who thought a male enhancement pill would land you a year outside of work? It's like, and then who's stupid enough to do steroids not consistently leading up to a fight? It's like, I've never done steroids, but any person with common sense would know not to do steroids one dose like a week before your fight. It makes no sense. And I think all you guys are here are really smart. Probably most of you guys are here are smarter than me. And it's like, you guys know that this makes no freaking sense. Like, why would I do steroids a week before my fight? It's really hurtful. That's all it really boils down to.
Do you feel like you can still be, or do you still want to be a role model?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think there's a lot of people right now just waiting for this whole situation to play out to see. I don't know. I think somewhere along the line, the inspiration that I've kind of been associating with is just strength throughout shit. Just fucking keeping your head up high and being able to survive really bad situations.
Last question I have, what do you still hope to achieve in your sport?
Well, in the sport, there's a lot of things I really want to do. I want to get that belt away from Cormier. And you mean like in the actual cage or what?
Yeah, well, what goals do you still have?
Goals that I still have, I just really want to take the asterisk away from the years and the miles and all the push-ups that I've actually put in. I've completely committed my life to a fighter, where some people could be themselves and they could be a lawyer on the side, or they could be, a dentist but still be themselves. Like, my whole life is what I do for a living, and it's terrible that there's an asterisk next to my career, because I started this when I was a little boy, and I just want to get rid of that. I just want to get rid of that asterisk and just show people, like, brother, I do not have to cheat to win fights. I mean, this is my heart and soul.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Mr. Ladakis, across.
Mr. Jones, what assurances can you give the commission that this will never happen again?
Well, to be honest with you, it's like a really hard question to happen, because I didn't do this in the first place. And so it's like, do you believe in conspiracies? What do I have to do? Like, lock myself in a closet and literally just keep me and my wife in the same room to make sure I'm not tainted by anybody or anything? It's like, so that's how I answer that question. It's like, my assurance was it was a promise I made to the people and the kids of Albuquerque that I get my life together and I'd be more of a living example. And to like I said, take a sex pill that you're planning on having in your intimate private life, resort to estrogen blockers, a year suspension. It was like, what in the world is going on? And then to knock out Daniel Cormier and such a proud moment, and to have all these people that are so proud look at me like, what in the world's going on? It's like, John, get it together. It's like, dude, I do have it together. It just don't seem like, because my freaking luck has been terrible when it comes to my relationship with USADA. So how can I assure it? I don't want to eat my words, because I don't know how this happened in the first place.
Did you receive any pay-per-view money as a result of the Cormier fight?
Yes.
Was it 7 figures or around that area, or higher?
There's still things coming in, so it's hard to say.
No further questions.
Questions from the commissioners? I'd like to begin. Commissioner Shanakidas, I know you have questions.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Jones.
Go on, man.
I'd like to ask you some questions, if that's okay with you. I'd like to preface this with, if I ask you any questions that are confusing or are not understandable, just let me know. I'm not trying to trick you, and I'll try to rephrase it, okay?
Okay.
And I'm also not trying to upset you or embarrass you, but we have a job to do here, so we're just trying to get to the bottom as best as we can.
I've done some pretty embarrassing things, so.
Okay, so let's start with the most obvious. the sex enhancement supplements. In 2016, you popped for 2 prohibited substances. And during a lot of the interviews, you told the media that you had experience with Viagra, Cialis, and the tadalafil that you were given by one of your teammates, right?
I've had quite a bit of experience with Cialis and Viagra over the years, but this last thing was the first time, yeah.
So, in 2017, let's say between January and July of 2017, had you taken any sex enhancement supplements?
In 2007.
So last year, first half of last year, maybe put it that way. That you can remember.
Not that I know of.
No.
Well, since the I'm not sure what this question. I guess since the original situation that we had with the male enhancement, you know, I was told that, you know, if you ever feel the need, then getting an actual prescription to like a Cialis would be the best idea, and to never ever take anything. That's
so,
not.
Other than prescription, you have not had any experience since let's say June of 2016, nothing over the counter, no supplements, nothing like that?
No, no, since this last situation, no, I realized that negligence could get you in trouble. And, you know, originally I thought it was all about, with USADA, I thought it was about performance enhancers, you know what I mean? So now I know for a fact not to take anything that's not prescribed by a doctor or approved by USADA, both.
Okay, so in all of 2017, let's say last year, nothing over the counter, no supplements, nothing other than prescription?
Yes, I think so.
In terms of male sex enhancement?
Oh, yes, correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's talk about this. Out of competition, June 16th, 2016 test, the one where you popped for the 2 prohibited substances. This was right before UFC 200, where you were supposed to fight Daniel Cormier, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm terrible with dates. I'm really bad with dates.
Well, 2016. It's the one where you popped for the 2.
Right.
Okay. So at the time that you were tested, you also filled out the standard declaration of use form, the one where you are supposed to list any substances or supplements or medications. You remember that?
Yes.
Actually, every time that USADA tests you, you have to fill out one of those forms,
Yes.
right? That time when they tested you in 2016, that was like the 6th time they tested you, right? Something like that.
Okay.
And every single time you fill out the form, and at the bottom it says that you declare that this is truthful and complete, right?
Yes.
Okay. And on that occasion, when you filled that out, you actually didn't write, you wrote down that you haven't taken any supplements, correct?
Yes.
But actually, you had, you just didn't put them in, right?
Yes.
And it was the tadalafil, and also there was a T-animal, something like that, another supplement that you take, but you didn't put them in. Do you remember that?
I would imagine what you're saying is true, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Because actually, in April of that year, you were also tested by USADA, but in that declaration of use, you put in like 8 supplements. You remember
Yes.
that?
No, I don't, but if that was what was put in, then that was probably, if 8 supplements were listed, it was probably my manager being there with me physically at the time that just filled out the paperwork.
Well, at least certainly you learned after this incident with the tadalafil that you really need to put everything in.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So in 2017, in July 28th, the day before your fight, UFC 214 with Cormier, you were also given a declaration of use. right, to fill out. And you filled out with, I think, 7 supplements. You remember that? And you signed at the bottom, this is truthful, this is complete with all the supplements, right?
Okay.
But actually, after you popped for Turinabol, another 10 supplements were sent to the Smyrna lab for testing that were not listed
All
on
10
this
weren't listed?
declaration of use. You know that, right?
You're saying there were 10 supplements that I never listed?
Correct.
Probably like fish oil and protein.
And Endura, and Betalite, and Omegagenics,
Very healthy
and
things that
Vegilite,
people should
and
take.
glutamine, 10 supplements.
Anything though? Okay. I was just saying, like, I'm sure everything that you just read off were very healthy things that men who are even athletes could and should probably take.
But they're supplements that
Yes, ma'am.
you know should have been listed. Okay. So you said that, you just said that the last stupid thing that you did, or dumb thing that you did, I'm sorry, I don't remember the words I used, was 3 years ago, and that's the hit and run, right? That was in New Mexico, 2015. It was a car accident where you left the scene and there was a woman who was pregnant, she was left injured, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you pled to a felony fleeing the scene of an accident, something like that, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you were put on probation after that, and you had to serve your time on probation, correct?
Yeah, there was a lot of penalties I had to go through for that, but yes.
But at least that was one.
That was one of them, yes.
And as part
Huge lawsuit.
of your probation, there were conditions, like if you got citations or if you did something wrong, you had to report. I mean, there were lots of conditions, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
While you were on probation, you were actually cited like 5 times, including for drag racing, were you not?
It was all the same scenario, and what I learned that day is that if you rev your engine at a red light, the moment that the light turns green, you're automatically legally drag racing. So he cited me for drag racing, but not speeding. He gave me one for having a vanity over my license plate, a whole bunch of crazy things. Then that guy came out.
You had 5 citations that you actually failed to report,
And
right?
then in one sitting.
Right.
For revving my engine, he ended up giving me 5 citations.
Okay, but you did not report that as you were supposed to, and then you were arrested for a violation of your probation.
No, ma'am. I didn't get arrested for violating. I got arrested because I had interaction with a law enforcement agent. It wasn't that I didn't report anything. I literally was like getting arrested the next day.
You got additional community service for that, didn't you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Which I did more than what was given to me. Just out of good faith and because I found the negative talking to kids.
In connection with the testing for this event in 2017, with the positive testing, you were given a letter by USADA, right? Advising you of the possibility of their intent for suspension, right? The
Yes, ma'am.
possibility of what they could possibly do following
Yes.
a hearing, right?
Yes.
And the possible period of ineligibility that they could give you is something like 4 years, with another additional period for aggravating circumstances. 6 years, including aggravating circumstances like truthfulness, things like that, correct?
Yes.
You just told us that after the incident with the sex enhancement, supplement or medication, they said you were negligent, but you were not a cheater, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Actually, they actually said that your degree of fault was actually reckless. Do you remember that?
It was reckless. In this mental enhancement thing,
Yes.
if that's what it says, reckless and negligent.
And that you had a very high degree of fault because, in fact, he did not seem to care about your teammate where he got the tablet, but only what it did for him in terms of increasing his sexual pleasure. Do you remember this?
I'm sorry, can you tell me what paragraph I'm trying to follow?
It would be at page 21, and the reckless reference is at page 27.
So when USADA came into my life, I was on a suspension still, dealing with my hit-and-run car accident. At no point did I ever meet anyone with USADA. I never went to any of the seminars. I didn't know how great of an agency USADA was. I know that I've been an athlete my whole life and that I've taken mental enhancement pills several times throughout my life. And I know that I've never failed a drug test for anything illegal. One of my favorite quotes by Dan Gable is, when I know a man is taking steroids, I know that I can beat him because he doesn't have the work ethic that it takes to be at a certain point. And so, throughout my whole entire MMA career, I've always been an advocate, like going out of my way to talk about being totally against enhancement. I'm obviously not against that. Being totally against performance-enhancing drugs. Totally against it. I've probably spoken about it more than any other champion in UFC history. Being totally against it. So, to get back to the mental enhancement stuff, I had never met anybody from USADA. I never knew that this could even be possible, like an estrogen blocker through a mental enhancement pill. So when I took the pill without asking too many questions, like I said, I had never failed a drug test before, ever. And I know I've never done anything questionable before when it comes to performance enhancing and stuff like that. So I took it, and I thank God that the people said that all science shows that this kid was not trying to do anything outside of have a good time with his wife. So it's like...
Okay, Mr. Jones, let me ask you. In 2015, USADA became the independent anti-doping administrator for UFC. You know that,
yes.
Right? So you became part of the registered testing pool for USADA.
Yes.
And for UFC and USADA, right?
Yes.
And as part of this RTP, you were required to complete online educational classes, right?
I guess so. I'm going to be honest with you, I never did that.
Seriously? Because in 2015, you certified that you did. In 2016, you certified that you did. So now you're saying that you actually didn't?
Correct.
I see.
I had my management do it for me.
Okay.
I'm just here to be super open and honest with you guys.
Okay, so you never did any of these tutorials?
No.
So when you certified that you understood the tutorials, that you completed the tutorials, you lied?
No, I didn't lie. What I have been doing throughout my whole career is just having my management team go over contracts for me and, you know, approve of it themselves, and I've had them sign things on my behalf several times throughout my career.
Well, you knew that you were supposed to do these anti-doping tutorials.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely.
But you didn't do them. Now you're saying you didn't do them.
Ma'am, to be 1,000% honest with you, my management team and I, we know that we've never come close to even considering any type of cheating options, so we never thought that them signing my signature would be an issue, because it's just not in my heart to cheat.
I understand that, but I'm asking you about these tutorials.
Yes, ma'am, I did not sign it myself.
You do understand, though, that these educational tutorials are supposed to teach you about personal responsibility in taking anything, not just substances with anabolic steroids, but any substances that may contain contaminants.
Yes, ma'am.
Right? And then you have personal responsibility for taking anything and ingesting it. You understand that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. So let's talk about this polygraph that you took on December 7th, 2017. They asked you a total of 4 questions, right?
I thought it
4
was
questions.
If that's what it says, I'm sure you're correct. Yes, ma'am.
And before you were asked those 4 questions, you were told ahead of time the subject of the 4 questions.
No, not really. No.
So when the report says that you were told the subject, the report is not telling you the truth?
I was pretty much just briefed on the fact that they're going to ask me a lot of questions about a lot of different things to determine my honesty level. Like they started off asking me really simple questions, like are you an athlete and stuff like that, just to get a reading. So they actually asked me a lot more than 4 questions. And if only 4 are showing up, I guess that's the 4 questions that they actually cared about. But they asked me, it took well over an hour to complete the process. There was a lot of questions asked about my personal life, about stealing, about all types of stuff, to establish that the tests do affect women. Like questions like, are you 30 years old? Are you African American? Are you this? Are you that? Like very basic questions. Just to establish if it actually works. And then once they establish that it works, they ask me several questions. Some being about drugs, some being about street drugs, all types of questions. So there are way more than 4 questions. Yeah.
So when the report actually says that they discussed what they were going to ask you before they asked you, that's not actually true? Or is it true? Or do you remember?
I'm sorry, where are we reading from?
I don't know if you have,
I have it
you must
in
have
front
the
of me.
report because you put it in the
Yeah,
evidence.
it's Exhibit Q.
So pre-interview, and then the interview, and then the actual, the 4 questions that they list.
Right,
as having.
I'm just looking because in the interview phase it says the substances were discussed during the pre-testing examination to be oral turnabol, dihydrochloromethyl testosterone alcohol. So that he would know.
That's what I'm asking
Right.
about. So they actually told you there were, and then if you look at the relevant questions, there were 4 questions that were that they asked you about, that they asked you.
Those are the 4 relevant questions.
Yeah, because they asked me, it was
On the actual polygraph, there were 4 questions.
I was hooked up to that polygraph for well over an hour. They asked me so many more than 4 questions, man.
Well, there were pre-testing interview, and then there was a polygraph.
To me, I've never been through any of that. It was all the same. They were asking me questions with a lie detector on me to get true, whether it's true or false.
Let's talk about your previous findings. In connection with your previous with the accident that you had, the 2015 accident, were you fined by UFC?
Pretty sure I had with that.
Do you remember how much that was?
I don't, but I know I had to been fined.
Does $50,000 sound about right? I mean, $25,000, I'm sorry, sound about right? 2015?
Was it 50?
25.
I thought it was 50.
2014, it was 50, in 2015, it was 25,000. Does that sound
Okay, I
about
thought
right?
you were talking about 14.
Yeah.
Okay.
Does that sound about right?
I would imagine everything you have is factual, so I'll say yes.
And are there any other fines from either USADA or UFC that you recall?
Well, I signed a disclosure agreement with the woman that was in that car accident to never discuss the amount, but it was huge.
Not from private parties, I'm just talking about UFC and USADA, or any commission.
I don't know, honestly. The bill being strict, and the 25,000, and just legal fees that I had to go through and stuff like that. Okay.
So far as I know, those are the only.
The two, the 14 and 15.
I think that's. By the way, UFC gave you a Bentley, didn't they?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And
It was.
you wrapped that one around like a utility pole at some point, right?
That goes into the DWI that I got a long time ago. Like I said, super young back then, doing wild things.
That was.
It wasn't given to me. It was a payment for an agreement we made.
That was in 2010, right? 2010, the accident?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't think I have anything else right now.
Come back. Before we get to the vote, should questions on this end?
Excuse me?
You have questions for Mr. Jones?
No, my question, I don't want to be, I'm John Frierson, and I've been on the commission about 10 years. And I think I'm older than everybody here. But
It's a close race, John.
I'm sorry. I'm not a Stephen A. Smith, and maybe some of you guys don't know who he is. But he's a reporter. And some of the questions you're asking, number one, I didn't bring my hearing aid, so I can't hear them anyway. And the commissioner, she asked some good questions. Some I didn't hear, some I don't know. But I say this, my perspective. I read this thing backwards, period. And I want to say this, that I understand how good you are, good fighter, and all that, but it seems to me young people, like I was young once, make a lot of mistakes, a lot of mistakes. In fact, you don't mature, to me, until you're 40, 40-some odd, period. And you're coming before us with all of these different things, and you don't know this, you don't know that. And we, as a commission, we can't excuse all that, except say that you were young and hope that you want to be an example for young people that's going to come behind beside you. This is why I said about Stephen A. Smith. Some of you probably never heard of him, but he's an advocate, especially for African-American athletes who are actually the spokesman for many people, today, in today's world. I remember when football players, you open the Ebony magazine and they showed that there was one or two. But your young people coming along, you guys don't realize that you're an example, and you have to stay in this example. And my opinion, and I don't want to take it too long, is that you guys make a lot of money, you do a lot of different things, but when you're wrong, and you should be fined whatever it is, because somebody come behind you who makes $10,000 and gets fined by his commission or anybody else for $1,000. That's a lot of money. But when you make a lot of money, you should be expected to stand up, bite the bullet, and say, yeah, I was wrong. That's how my opinion of it. And you heard me when I'm bringing up about Stephen A. Smith and about this and that, the other. I've been in this thing for a long time, not just in boxing, but in the political world and everything else. And the point is, when you're wrong, you're wrong. And you should take the consequences. It's fine to get attorneys, and I love attorneys. Some people think I don't, but I do. They're all right. But they naturally, they're going to look out for you, but they're also looking out for themselves. And you have to remember that. And when you make a mistake, stand up to it.
Yes, sir.
I don't mean to be a soapbox commissioner, chairman, but I have to say what I feel.
Sure. Thank you.
Am I allowed to respond to him?
Do you want
Sir.
a response to your statement, Commissioner Cruz? He's asking if he could respond to it.
Yes, you can.
Sir, I feel. Yes, sir.
Like I said, I didn't bring my hearing aids this morning.
I'm on you. I sit here before you and I tell you that I have 1,000% in every situation that I've ever done paid for the dumb things that I've done. And I often handle it with grace, and I try not to show how much it has affected me, the consequences of my actions, but I have always had a consequence for my actions. Oftentimes people think, oh, John, you're a celebrity, so you get breaks, and you get, you know, you get this some type of weird favoritism. But if you actually have paid attention closely to everything that I've ever done, in almost zero circumstances have I got any type of leniency. Any type of leniency. So I've always been more than willing to step up as a father, as a man, to the wrong things that I've done. And that's why I'm here today, to step up to the wrong things that I've done. And honestly, I put it on everything that is dear to me, everything that's dear to my soul, that I did not do steroids. And in this situation, I swear to my Heavenly Father that I'm not wrong. So when you say you're wrong, I 100% agree. I've always handled my punishments head on. And in this situation, I am not wrong. I swear to anything. I swear to everything that's dear to me, which is my Heavenly Father, that I am not wrong in this situation.
Dr. Lee? Commissioner Sauer?
No.
Vice Chair?
I think maybe two questions. Do you have an opinion on the prevalence of the use of steroids in your sport?
What do you, like how big it is? I feel like I know scenarios of people who's done steroids, but they're very public cases where, you know, if you're a fellow UFC fighter, everyone knows the guys who have been guilty of doing steroids. But to talk about the actual percentage of guys who do it, honestly, I can't give much a suggestion because, like I said earlier, out of all the champions in UFC history, and if someone willing to do a report on it, I can guarantee you no one has been more of an advocate against performance-enhancing drugs. So if you are doing steroids, I wouldn't be the guy to talk to about it. I'm known, my reputation is known, especially on my team, as the guy who's working the hardest. And if your image is a guy who's a hard worker, and if you're a steroid coward, I'll call you, I'm not the guy to talk to about doing steroids.
Okay, but you agree that it's important that we do all we can to stop the use of steroids?
Absolutely, ma'am. Absolutely. And that's like me being here. I'm not sitting here saying that USADA is lying on me. And what I am saying is that I'm in a really crappy situation because I'm faced with the fact that I started wrestling when I was about 11 years old, and it's led me to college, and it led me to state champions in high school, and all types of state championships throughout high school, and national championships in college, and become the youngest UFC champion in sports history, and now steroids out of nowhere. Like, don't you guys think achieving all those things, if I was a steroid guy through all these great achievements, I would have been caught a long time ago. It's like, it's like, I understand that you guys had to clean up the sport, but I think it'd be super important to throw people and lock them away, throw the keys away to people who are caught with situations that are undisputable. Like this, and in my situation, it's like, why would he do steroids 1 week before his fight? This kid's been winning since day one. Why would he do steroids? So if you guys are gonna clean up the sport, clean it in a situation, and I'm not telling you guys what to do, obviously you guys are in charge and this is really out of my hands, but clean it in situations where you're just like, dude, this kid is so guilty. It's like my situation is like, dude, you hit someone with your car, paid damn near $1 million in a lawsuit, and it's like I'm getting judged for all the stupid shit I've done a long time ago. In this scenario, if we were to ignore all the dumb things that I've done in the past, it's like, it's just like, it almost makes you feel like, dude, if you have the troubled past, you have no rights for no matter what evidence you come up with or can't come up with. It's just, you're just guilty.
Okay, thank you, that's a good answer. I'd like to clarify when Commissioner Shenarkides was asking you, is it your testimony today that when you took the tutorials by WADA about what was improper or what could get you in trouble in the testing in September 2015, October 2015, December 2015, that you do not recall doing those tutorials, or that you affirmatively did not take them?
I didn't take them.
Okay, and did you state that your signature was forged by your management on that certification?
Yes.
Last question. You said you were working hard to change you have been working hard to change your image. Can you give some more examples? You mentioned speaking to the kids at the schools.
Well, yeah, I definitely spoke to a lot of kids at the schools, in situations where it was just so life-changing and so amazing to me. Literally having kids talk to me about molestation, just all types of stuff that was none of my business, but at that moment I got to recognize my platform, and that especially kids of Albuquerque needs a positive thing. You know, a lot of the fighters that's come out of Albuquerque have, I don't know, some of them didn't really give kids that much to, especially the biggest names in boxing, and I don't want to mention anyone to be disrespectful. I just want to be a champion in Albuquerque for the kids of Albuquerque that no one's ever seen. I know that my light is super important to these people. My survival is super important to not only kids in Albuquerque, but to a lot of my fans.
Can you give me specific examples of things you've been doing to work on your image and to show that you're a different person than when you were younger and made these?
Really just changing up my life choices, changing up the people that I'm surrounded by, changing up the people that I'm surrounding myself, and just making a conscious effort to just be a better dude.
Can you give me some examples?
Well, I've lost a lot of friends, and I think that was the biggest thing. Like, you know, Michael Jackson always says you got to look at the man in the mirror, right, and start with yourself before you can really make an impact on others. And I think the biggest thing that I've done to change is just to work on myself and to not quit through all this stuff, and just work on being a better dude.
Okay, but give me some examples. These are generalisms. This might help you.
Okay. Examples that things I've done to
better yourself.
To better myself. Man, it's hard to explain because, I mean, outside of doing drunk mistakes, I don't really look at myself as being this evil guy that's walking around hurting innocent people, and I've just matured a lot. And unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity to really show it because of my inactivity. But I think I represent a positive message, and that's something that I'm still continuing. And like I said, I guess the biggest thing that I've done to better myself is mainly in my personal life, because you know, there's not really much that people could say about me in the ring. It's been doing stupid stuff like drinking and driving, something I haven't done. I hired a full-time, like a driver, and to make sure that in the vehicle accidents like a hit and run or a DWI could never happen again. Outside of my 2 driving incidents, I mean, there's really nothing that anyone could point at to just say, you know, this kid is a terrible human being. You know, the day I decided to run from that car accident I got into was one of the worst, it was probably the single worst decision I've ever made. But I can't really look myself in the mirror and say, John, you're just a disgusting human being. Have I done some stupid stuff with alcohol? Being a 20-year-old drunk idiot? Yeah. And I guess the biggest thing I always knew I had to do was just control my personal life. And so, like I said, you know, losing a lot of friends who I knew could lead me down the wrong path, that was a huge step. And just limiting any possibility of me doing something stupid behind the wheel ever again by knowing that if I decide to go out with any guy friends, that I would never be the guy who's drinking and driving again. I realized how irresponsible and stupid that was, and how much money it's cost me, and how much respect I've lost through it all.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
There are any no more questions?
I have my questions here. You have a follow-up? Go ahead, please make your...
The community service that you did with the children, it was October 2015, right around there, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So I hope you will see, recognize, and acknowledge that we gave you as much time as perhaps you were able to repeat yourself again and again, answer questions to make your case. Do you feel like you have made your case, John?
John?
Yes, sir.
Could I just add,
Sure,
before you shut it down? I sort of feel like I'm stuck between being on a parole board or on one of those panels for the primetime television shows where you judge somebody playing a ukulele. I sit here, and you obviously, as you have conceded, have conducted fairly deplorable a number of things in your life. And, you just sit here and say, well, there's been a pattern in your life that you pledged to correct and reverse. But I sit here and say that I hear good things from you, though I'm not inclined to vote in favor of anybody named Dew. And I just think that if we vote against you, in effect, we will pretty much set you adrift in terms of your career and whatever impact that may have on your future. On the other hand, it is Advent, and I think we all try to find in this period things that we may be able to do which may somehow make things better, either individually or hopefully largely. If we vote against you, I think the game's over. If we believe what you tell us, and you live as you tell us you will, then you have a chance to continue and have an opportunity for a better life. It's a very difficult place to be, and I don't think we as a commission encounter these circumstances with regularity, and I'm quite thankful that's the case. But my inclination is, after going through this, I hope what you're telling us is true.
Yes, sir. And just last thing, like I said, that hit and run car accident was 3 years ago, and I promise you guys, I have really tried to just get it all back.
You still drink alcohol?
Yes, sir.
Okay, it's my turn.
Sir.
Anybody done? Thank you. Yeah, we're going to get into Mr. Foster and discuss with him his recommendation in a second. But you were asked again and again here about making changes based on the things that keep happening to you. I haven't heard any real changes. Still drink alcohol. Still admitting that you're doing things that are very questionable. And I think you must realize that you have judgment issues, do you? Because, let me tell you something, Sarah, you said you might not be as smart as a lot of people in the room. I don't agree with that. You seem to be a very intelligent person, to me, very aware. You're also a great athlete, and I'm a fan of yours. I was at that fight, close by here in July. I know. But you have judgment issues. Have you considered changing your management? I mean,
actually, I have considered that several times. No, I'm joking. I think I could have some slight judgment issues, but I think I've made a lot of the necessary steps to check myself. Like I said, to take a mental enhancement pill was. I got you. I got you.
So hang in there with me.
Sorry.
I don't mean to be cutting you off, but I want to keep going over the same ground. There are judgment issues. There are things that you could consider, perhaps should consider. It's really up to you. But we are put in a position here to make a decision, which is to either support or change our executive officer, who, if you haven't figured out by now, is the last place he wants to be. Former MMA fighter. Okay? Last place he wants to be, having to make these recommendations. That I can assure you and anyone else who is wondering about that. And again, we'll get to him in a second, Mr. Foster. Mr. Jones, you keep talking about how you're older. I mean, you were 29 last year.
Yes, sir.
You're not older. We're older. Okay? So I'm not going to give you that one. It's not our burden that it's an. I disagree with my friend, respected friend, if I understood him correctly, Commissioner Souter. We're not here to end your career. We're to make a decision based on a recommendation, a decision that you put us in. You put us in this situation. You understand that, correct? Yes or no? I mean,
yes.
That's a positive.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
You also took and were paid the money, a lot of money, for that fight that was declared no contest, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I have issues with that, but I don't get to decide that. Two final things, maybe one. No, it is two. Do you consider a doped athlete, intent or non-intent doesn't matter, a danger to his or her opponent in the octagon?
Absolutely.
So you can see what the effects of a doped athlete, a testing positive athlete has in the octagon. Because this has been all about you, hasn't it, this hearing?
Yes, sir.
See, but for us, it's not all about you, it's about your opponents and all the other athletes out there. We haven't talked about that at all tonight, and I'm not happy about that as well. But again, I don't get to decide everything. Do you understand the impact this has on the actions that you've taken on your opponents?
Could I answer that without saying yes?
That's a question.
Yes, sir. If I was sitting here knowing in my heart that I had been doing steroids or I ever did steroids, I would feel some weird guilt. I absolutely understand what steroids could do to someone else or do to your own health. And that's why I've sworn up and down and done meetings that I didn't have to do and done polygraphs and all this type of stuff to tell you that I, of all people, absolutely understand what performance-enhancing drugs could do to someone. That's why I'm trying to swear with all sincerity that I would never do that.
Not just you, but to your opponents and to your sport.
To your legacy and to, yeah, absolutely.
That's back to you, Mr. Jones, to your opponents and to your sport.
Yes, sir.
To MMA, the world of MMA.
That's why I would never do it. Okay. I hate the fact that Lance Armstrong is associated with steroids. You know what that does to cycling? I hate that Barry Bonds is associated with steroids. You know what that does to boxing? I understand that I'm kind of, right now, becoming as one of the pioneers of my sport, could be one of the originators of boxing, the way people look at, you know, some of the old greats, the Willie Peps and the Jack Johnsons and all this stuff. I understand how important.
I do understand you are smart.
Yes, I do understand, and that's why I would not disrespect myself in MMA at its birth state by being a cheater.
But you're making my point for me if you understand the situation that we're in here. okay?
Sir,
You have to understand, I hope that you do, and I think that you do.
I do.
Which is good.
1,000%.
But it really does put us in that position. You realize that we're the state of California, the regulatory agency, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I just want to make sure that's clear. Okay, Mr. Walker, can we talk to this gentleman about the recommendation on to the next steps?
Absolutely. Andy, what is your recommendation? Because you're new on this.
And I would hope to cover, I would hope to cover. I would hope to cover Mr. Foster's position in a closing argument. If we could go to the closing. And then,
that's fine.
And if I don't cover it, I'm sure Mr. Foster would follow up.
Very good.
We'd like to hear from Andy at some point. Whenever you guys work this out, please, whenever you do this, for your close.
Commissioner, so let me preface my recommendation a little bit. Okay, I have a personal view and I have my professional view. Okay, my personal view is I believe him. And it's not just with what he said. I view it from common sense. We've heard from scientists and all this stuff. I'm looking at common sense. This makes no sense for him to take this drug on the test that he knows is coming. That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Okay? Having said that, here we are. We're sitting here. Okay? There's nothing I can do about that. We're sitting here. My recommendation is $2,500 for 303, $2,500 for discredit to mixed martial arts, and $200,000, that's 40% of the purse, from Business and Professions Codes 18843B. Now look, Howard Jacobs wrote something in his brief that I thought a lot about when he said, look, this 40% thing should be reserved for the most severe offenses, and I agree with that. Okay? I agree with that. Mr. Jones has been in front of USADA once. He's now with us here. But we're not talking about what he's done in the past. We're talking about 40%. And I had to ask myself when I was coming up with this, look, he made $500,000 from the bout. That's good. That's from a bout agreement. Okay? Mr. Jones also made a considerable amount of money from the pay-per-view sales that surrounded this fight. And I don't believe he would be able to do that without that state license. Okay? That's why I came up with that. So, you know, then as far as the license goes, I want to be very clear that I do not believe we should end Mr. Jones's career today. Okay? But I do believe he should sit out for a while. Okay? He's already sit out a good while. I guarantee you he's already missed a fight or two that he could have made money on. I guarantee it. But I think we should revoke his license. That's what my recommendation is. That's what I'm recommending to you guys. I don't think Mr. Jones gets to be a professional mixed martial artist right now. That's what I believe. Let him deal with USADA. Let USADA give their discipline, whatever it's going to be. When that's completed, I would be inclined to support Mr. Jones's application to return to this commission and get his license back. That's where we're at, and that's my recommendation, sir.
So, Lucas, you want to add something to that closing argument?
No.
Mr. Jacobs?
I'll keep this short because I know we're way over time.
It's okay.
There is one point that I did want to address just briefly on the questions about the doping control form and the supplements that were tested, just to make sure that we're all clear on that, and I'll keep it short. If you look at our Exhibit E, which is the I would be entitled to comment on the evidence that comes in. I would be done with this.
Change your mind? Okay.
No, I'll be done with this in less than a minute on this.
Hope it's something new. Doesn't sound like it. Okay.
Okay. You'll see in the letter that what we said is we tested more than just the supplements that were taken in the 7 days before the fight. And I'll let you go look at that letter in Exhibit E. I don't need to read it to you. I just wanted to clarify that point. As far as the recommendation, I'll start with the license revocation. I think that our position on that is, as we stated in the brief, I mean, frankly, if the license is going to be revoked and Jon Jones can come back and reapply, that's fine. That's fine. So it makes that part easy, I guess. I mean, there are some issues as to when he can come back. My reading of the regulations, as you see in the brief, is that he could, in theory, come back as early as August, but would he do that if he were suspended by USADA? It seems like it wouldn't make much sense to do that. But we're fine with that recommendation. On the fine, I mean, this is a tough point, and I do appreciate Mr. Foster thinking about it closely. I think that the reading of the regulations, at least my reading of it, is that the two $2,500 fines, that's fine. I mean, we haven't raised any issues with that. The 40% fine, if you look at the regs at section 18843B of the Business and Professions Code, it says that you can assess a fine of up to 40% of the total purse for a violation related to use of prohibited substances. And so the question is, what does that mean? Is the related to use of prohibited substances mean that the factors that you should be taking into account in assessing the fine are this positive test, or that you should also be taking into account all these other things we've been talking about, the DUI and the hit and run, the things that he's been punished for? And our position, I think, is clear, is that you shouldn't. And that you have discretion. It says up to 40%. And our position is that that should be reserved for cases where the use of the prohibited substance part is, you know, intentional at the highest end. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. That's good.
That is it.
Okay. Mr. Walker, you have go for a motion.
That's correct. To sustain the fines, the suspension, and the revocation, based on the recommendation.
Commissioners, do we have a motion?
I so moved.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second.
I said, oh, we did.
You have a second. Sorry, you said we have a second. So here's an opportunity for the public to come up and make their thoughts known. You're encouraged, if you wish, to speak to us, to say anything you might have with regard to this matter. So if you want to come up, we'll state your name, give you a microphone, and have you say. Can we?
I'll just make mine. I think I'm done with it.
Hi, my name is Giovanni. I'm a fan of mixed martial arts, and no one paid me to be here or anything like that. My thoughts on everything that I've heard. I think that if someone is found to be guilty, they should be punished through monetary means. I feel that this is a punishment that could be pertained to someone if they make a mistake by accident or something like that. And I feel that it would give the opportunity of a fighter to correct said mistakes. So I feel if you guys make any decision, it should be a monetary punishment and not necessarily a revocation of license. That's just from hearing everything that you guys have said, and if I have any sort of a correct assessment on what's being said and what's going on.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Anyone else like to comment? Okay.
Jim?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to hear again exactly in layman's terms what the recommendation was. I heard that I would like to hear what the second is.
We have a motion.
What is?
We have a motion.
Spell it out, because I'd like to hear it.
Okay, so we have a motion.
Before I vote.
We have a motion and a second to take a vote on Mr. Foster's recommendation of revocation and the 40% fine plus the two $2,500 fines, correct?
Yes. Is that it?
Okay? So it's time to vote.
With the idea that this other group find out what they get back in life.
Absolutely, as Mr. Jacobs
Okay.
said, like in the solid process.
Plain English, I like plain English. This is fine for all you attorneys out there and all that, but I like plain English.
Yes, sir.
I'm a Harlem boy that only knows plain English, not all.
Don't let him fool you, he's the smartest guy in here. Okay, yes. Want to discuss more? Okay. We have a second, we can vote, or you can discuss more? You're welcome to.
Yeah, it's on the floor, the question was first, now it's time to discuss it.
Because I think the other option is possible suspension, right? So we can revoke, we can suspend. Those are the two options, or we can do nothing. So, in my estimation, the reason for the revocation would be this. If we were to suspend, we could actually suspend for longer. The revocation would be for a year, according to our statutory scheme, correct? If we were to suspend, we could suspend for longer. But in my opinion, the problem is Mr. Jones has been suspended before. And under a suspension, he gets his license back automatically at the end of the suspension. With a revocation, there's actually a condition that he comes back to our commission and he show us evidence of rehabilitation, which he hasn't had to do before. So while the time might be shorter, we can say no for whatever period of time. That year, the next year, or whenever he applies. And I do think that the chairman is correct. Perhaps there is a team around him, perhaps there are people around him, I don't know, who are enabling Mr. Jones in a way that he shouldn't be enabled, because even after the 2015 accident, Mr. Jones went on to have people sign for him declarations that he took online classes that he should be taking himself. And it isn't just the intentional or not intentional, because under our scheme, it doesn't matter. It is a strict liability. It's in your system. It's in your system. And the reason is because you have to take personal responsibility. That's the reason. So I think it will be important for Mr. Jones to come and show evidence that he is doing something to show personal responsibility. And also, just maybe strategically, although USADA's letter says 4 to 6 years, well, certainly I believe they're going to give him more than one. I think maybe somewhere between 18 months and 2 years. That's just what I believe. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before, although I tell my children I'm never wrong, but whatever. So if that's the case, I don't believe he will come back to us while the suspension is going on. But even if he does, we have the ability to say no. So
okay, we have
there's a motion.
Yeah. Right.
There's a motion.
I think that we seem to be going back over the same stuff. So anybody else? I'm calling for the vote. Mr. Foster?
Chairman Corbelli.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Lehman.
Aye.
Commissioner Fryerson.
Aye.
Commissioner Senior-Quidez.
Aye.
Commissioner Salmon.
Aye.
Commissioner Dr. Williams.
Aye.
6-0, sir. Recommendations passed.
Mr. Jones, I want to see you fighting as soon as possible. I hope you believe me, because I mean that.
I do believe.
I hope you're listening to some of the other things that I said to you and the other commissioners. Think about the people around you, some of the things that you're still doing. You're a unique, outstanding individual and athlete. We want to see you back in the cage as soon as possible. Come back to us.
Great.
Okay?
One more thing, Mr. Jones, you heard me talking about, I've been ill for a long time, so I'm home and I'm listening to a lot of TV. I really want you to look up who I was talking about, Stephen A. Smith.
I don't believe.
I don't know if you know about him or whatever happened, but he's an advocate, especially for African American athletes who need some training, who need some understanding who they are and who they impress. Because I have a grandson who doesn't even know what's going on or what happened in the past. And you need to be a role model. That's all I'm saying. Okay, so thank you.
We're going to adjourn for lunch in 1 hour. 45 minutes. We'll be back. Thank you all. Thank you.